Welcome to our logging event with our first set of volunteers. This is Grant. He's learning to use the chainsaw by cutting 18-inch rounds out of our firewood logs. This is how everybody got themselves accustomed to using the chainsaw. Here he is learning to roll the chainsaw around the log to finish the cut with the way the logs are stacked. He wanted to move the log, but Chuck is showing him, don't move the log, move your saw. Next up is Matt. He did extremely well. He cut probably 99% of the 18-inch rounds. I believe he cut that entire pile you're seeing there, plus additional logs that we ended up stacking from what we cut throughout the day. We ended up cutting down 8 trees total. And then there's Kelly doing her 18-inch round and learning to use the chainsaw. And as I mentioned, this is our first log yard. We have 3 of them. This one is strictly for firewood. Now, after they got comfortable using the chainsaw and cutting the 18-inch rounds for the log splitter, we moved on to basically splitting the logs and learning how to use the splitter. So that'll be coming up next. Here's Grant, first one up. Basically the splitter splits into 4 chunks, and some of those chunks are too large still for our wood burning stove. So they go back onto the splitter and get resplit again. Right now, Grant is learning that you got to keep the splitter, pushing the splitter through so you get an entire split on the log and not stopping too soon. And this is Matt splitting a larger log. Just kind of getting himself familiar with the equipment, which didn't take him long at all. And Kelly would do a lot of the stacking, so she's grabbing the logs from him. And you can see everybody's in their chainsaw safety gear. As they got familiar with each of the work that they'd be doing, they started to shed some of the safety gear based off of what work they were doing, because this is a little more gear than they need to be splitting wood. Chuck is telling her to put it down flat just so she has the stability. We want to make it easy for our volunteers. You can see it has an auto return, which is handy when you want your hands free. So Matt is helping Kelly out here. Some of these rounds are very heavy because they're fresh cut, and so we're using muscle to cut it in half so that then she can manage the half rounds versus the full rounds. Kelly ended up cutting about 1.5 cords of wood. I shouldn't say cutting, it's splitting. So she split 1.5 cords of wood that day and stacked it. So we decided she probably should have lost like 30 pounds that day because it was a lot of strenuous work. Okay, we're cutting down the first tree of the day. This is going to start the delimbing process and teach them to use the tractor. So this is a good size white fir. This is actually a previous shot where Grant is learning to use the tractor. Those are some of the limbs that we took off the tree that you just saw fall, just so that the logger could get underneath the tree easily. So Grant is learning how to manipulate that grapple to grab everything he wants. And that's Matt inside with the chainsaw cutting down the limbs so that Chuck can get underneath there to cut that first tree down. So that's the tree down. Matt's been delimbing the branches off of the trunk and putting them into piles for Grant, who comes by with the tractor and lifts them and takes them over. Sorry, that's me showing Kelly, who's all by herself just splitting away. And then Grant's telling me to get out of the way. So he's about to take all those limbs over to our debris pile, which is right over there. And that's the second debris pile out of the 4 we ended up making that day. We were initially planning to burn our debris, but with how much we have, we are now going to buy a chipper, and we'll chip it and put it back into the ground. So this is Grant cutting down his first tree. We gave him a pretty good sized tree to tackle, but it is on nice flat ground that was pretty clear, and the tree itself was straight, wasn't leaning anywhere. It seemed like a good tree. Right now they're working on the wedge that needs to be cut in front of the tree, which basically also tells the tree what direction you want it to fall. So Grant is making his first straight cut, which will be the bottom of the wedge. And once he gets that in as deep as it needs to be, he'll then take the chainsaw out and come back up to the top and cut down into the wedge. I should say down into the first cut to make the wedge. So right now Chuck is showing him basically the angle he wants to have to create the wedge. They're just readjusting the angle here. And Grant was very good, took his time, took it slowly. And there's the wedge, popped right out. Good job. Now he's going to go to the back of the tree, and he's basically going about 4 inches above the wedge cut. From the front. He's not cutting at the wedge cut, but he's going behind the tree, eyeing it to about 4 inches above the wedge, and he's cutting straight into that tree. And the goal is that it will fall in the direction that we plan for it to fall. This tree is probably about 70 feet tall. They are having a little bit of difficulty. Like I said, it's a good size trunk. Chuck is looking to upgrade to a larger bladed chainsaw. This one's 18 inches. I believe he's going to 24, but I don't remember. So it looks like Chuck is going to finish that cut now. And basically this is what our event is like. If you're comfortable, you can fall trees. You can split the logs. You can delimb trees. You can take the debris to the debris piles. And then we call it a day.